And I'm going to start with Tyreek. Okay, so I'm assuming this is what you've got done. All right, now let's break this down. Is this someone typing on a keyboard? Okay, so it's the character pushing the button. Your art is very blocky. If you used more rounded artwork, you could get your motion a little bit smoother. Like if the hand... I'm just roughing this out real quick. So let's pretend this is the hand, and it's nice and rounded. So even if I have it on its own layer, if I go click and drag, and since yours has no stroke around it, you're not going to have to worry about adding in the expression I showed you. But down here, if you go round cap, round join, in the stroke settings, and then all you have to do is animate the path. I'm going to hit shift, and remember you can move the path point as well as the Bezier curve. You see that motion? It's keeping the shape and size of the finger compared to that. Like if this were to be this person being shocked, they push it. And what we could do is, if I parent the finger to the palm, okay, I still can animate the finger independently. So we could go like this, and then I can animate the palm a little to look like it pushes down, and then when the shock hits, we'll do the wiggle, but we'll put a slider on it. So then I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, click there. And you see they're working together. I'm getting some more erratic movement. Should be put a null in here, and then throw a slider on it. I hit E on the keyboard to get to the effect for slider control. And I believe it's the amount. We'll try the amount first. So I selected my amount. So it's number of times per second, then the amount. Okay, that looked like it did it. So it was the first number, the times per second, and I drag that to the slider. 0 is off, 1 is on. So if I go click my slider, go a couple frames, set that to 1. Now the wiggle's happening, however long you want the wiggle to happen. Set your keyframe, and then for the wiggle to stop, set your 4th keyframe. So it's 0 no wiggle, 1 wiggle on, 1 wiggle on for the length you want the wiggle, 0 wiggle off. You grab the first number, the number of times per second, highlight that, pick whip up to your slider, and that's how you can turn the effect of the expression off and on. Like that. Good evening, Alex. And another thing that would help is as the hand's shocked, the rest of the fingers shoot straight out like they're shocked. Now, going from one scene to the next, it would help if after this shock scene happens, you cut to like a hard cut, no transition, to the character's face and possibly looking at his hand. You know, so you see the hand and its face and you tie it together. That's what I would do. Or you have the face and then the hand comes up, just to tie them together. Sometimes you can do hard cuts, or you can do zoom in, zoom outs, transitions, but you normally want to keep the eye in the same spot, and I'll show you what I mean by that. Here's the fast way of doing it. I hold down Control to move my anchor point with the pan behind tool. up to the top corner. And I did 33 wide, 50 high. And I'll tell you why in a second. Alright, so if I've got my grid set up, and I've got an object and I want the person to look over here, and then the next scene, it's not so much of a jump because I had that object over there, because I'm trying to keep the viewer at that section. But if you're doing something like that and then see how it's too far of a jump for the eye? Now, one way around this is leading lines are a great design tool. And I'm going to add a trim path to this. That was a bit too fast. So like that. Using that line to draw the viewer's eye over to the next section of the screen is another way. And you can get it even more sophisticated if you want. Don't forget, adjustment layers affect every layer below. And as we've learned, the transform effect is a very powerful way to make it look like a camera zoom. Like that. That's much better. Good evening, Joy. And I'm going to tackle your question in a second. Like that. So that's an example of if you're going too far off your rule of thirds, using leading lines and some camera motion so that the viewer's eye can get to that next spot. That might help you out too with some of your things, but you could also use transitions. And some of the transitions that are good, so hard cut is just going from one scene to the next. That's a hard cut. And I'm going to make a new composition. And I've already got the work from tonight in there. So let's do this. So we got this first one and the second one. There's tons of transitions to go from one thing to the next. And I'm going to put color in each one just so that it'll help show the transition better. Okay, so that's the first background. And there's the second. So this would be a hard cut. And then we could work on transitions. So I've got my overlap. I put Venetian blinds on the top one. Set my transition completion. There's my Venetian blinds. So it's really picking a transition you want to use and setting how long that transition is going to be, or creating your own stylish ones with particles like we did last week. Just watch which one you pick, because they all do something different. Or like I said, you could try something tried and true, you know, wipes, irises, dissolves, or you can design your own, which I think would look the best. Come up with your own transition. Enjoy your thing. You were saying, okay, now this is for everybody. I already said this before in the other labs, but I'm going to say it again. We're only doing one more assignment. The final assignment is not 2. You're no longer doing 2 animations. It's 1. I want one phenomenal 15-second either movie title sequence, movie credit sequence, or a movie title, okay? 15 seconds, either a movie credit sequence or a movie title, all right? Your best work. Don't do 2, do 1. 1 animation. Either the title or the credit sequence, okay? So that's the first part of Joy's thing. And the second part, I would suggest not having it pandemic related. People are so done with the shutdowns and the pandemic, and if you go into the job force trying to get a job and you've got that in your reel, I do not think it'll go in your favor. One of my students did one before last semester, but this was like right at the start of it. It was like 2 months in, but this is like 13 months in, and people are just done with it. So I would pick something other than pandemic or lockdown related, anything but that. And again, you cannot do a licensed franchise. Like, you can't do Star Wars or Harry Potter. Yeah, come up with your own thing. So I hope that helps you out with that. Did anybody else put any work in their folders? Yeah, so you're going to have a lot of animating, Tyreek. Just be careful with this and put a lot of love into each scene. Each scene should only last a couple seconds. So, you know, look at it that way, saying, hey, you know, this is a lot of work, but it's going to be a lot of mini shots. And I can't read your notes because it's after it's in Word and I don't have Word. So if you could just put that into Google Docs or email to me in text. Oh, Alexis. All right. My storyboard. All right. So I'll look at Liam, then Alexis. Update the description. I will. I already emailed out about that as well. I've emailed out about it. I've mentioned it in the last few labs and lectures. So yes, I will update that to reflect that. And remember, you don't have to do fancy, you know, mock-ups. Just quick pencil sketch, just so you can get animating as soon as possible. So this is a classic example of eye tracing, like I was just talking about. You're keeping the viewer's eye. This is smart, well thought out. This is going to be some complex shape tweening, but, you know, just focus on how you change the paths and it should look pretty neat. Interesting. Okay, so 2 things on this. The time lapse. Let's tackle that first. Don't worry, I'm just doing this quick so I don't waste everyone's time. All right, let's see what we got. See how that's a smooth motion? There's an effect called Posterize Time, and you could use this to change the frame rate. See what happened there? Let's do a comparison. And when you've got your keyframing done, but you need to move everything uniformly, I highlight all my keyframes, and if you're over one of them exactly, you can move everything uniformly without messing up your motion. All right, here we go. The red will not have posterized time, the blue will. Watch the change in motion. Yeah, no problem at all, Tyreek. So Liam, do you see how you're getting a choppier, more stylized look with posterized time? And you can keep dialing it back too, until you find the right amount of time you want to change it. And that'll help stylize some of your motion. Posterize time. That's going to help with the jittery effect might be a nice thing. Like I said, mess around with it. You could also keyframe it if you want. That's up to you. In my lectures, I've got something on morphing PNGs, okay? And it's showing going from one to another using, I think it's Reshape. And just make sure there's alpha, like this. I want to mess around with this real fast. And Photoshop's your way to go for this. So after I do this morph, I'm going to test this out. Then I'm going to tackle Alexis. The female one might be more interesting because of the hair growing, but we'll see. When you're doing morphs like this, you want to have a constant ratio. So it's like these are already at the ratio I want. So I'm going to set up one Photoshop file where all the feet are lined up at the baseline and they're all relative to one another. That's a secret to a good morph. You don't want to have to scale one in After Effects because that's going to mess up incredibly what's going to happen. I just hit Command J to duplicate my layer. Now they're silhouetted. We'll just pick a color that's easy to see. We'll try going from the man to the old man. And again, positioning these before you get them into After Effects is everything. You want to have a strategy. And for me, the strategy is going to be the feet lined up, and I'm going to go off of this leg. See how they're semi-lined up? Like that? Notice what I'm doing, Alex? That should give you a more successful morph as well. So, trying to find a common point. So now it's going to look like he's moving over to that way, and the feet and legs are moving slightly. And I could put this up for everybody to have to work off of, should you choose to. And there's my art. So I've got my first layer selected, and I choose Auto Trace. I do not want to make a new layer. And it's going to have extra paths here, which is going to mess me up. I only want to do one path. I could do those another way if I wanted, but now I've got the outside shape, which is what I want. I'm just hitting the M key to get my mask, and the old man is one solid path. Alright, so I've named my masks. If there were images in here, you'd see the images morph as well, but you're using silhouettes, which will work greatly to your benefit. I'm copying the old man mask and putting it into the young man. There we go. I just changed that to add and it helped it work. So I've got my two masks. Good. Now I throw my reshape on the man layer. Source, man, destination, old man. Elasticity. Let's do loose. Interpolation, I'm going to do smooth. You could try what you want based off of your time, and then percentage will be the change over time. So if I go forward, and let's say it takes a second, you can pick how long you want yours. From one to the next. And I have the little mess because I took out those shapes. And also because I did not set my correspondence points. Here they are right here, correspondence points. There they are. I held down Alt and clicked. You want to go in between the path points, because if you move your path points, that's bad news. You want to keep your mask shaped the way you want. I'm going from the crown of the head to the crown of the head. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option and click in between the path points. Shoulder to shoulder. Oh, and you see my masks are no longer lined up either. Now let's check those correspondence points again. Top of the head, top of the head, shoulder to shoulder. Good. Now let's see how that looks. If you need to add more correspondence points, you just hold down Alt on one path and then line it up with the other path. And when you see that little circle up here, that's when you know you're moving a correspondence point. And you see it's getting clipped off here. That's because of the bounding box of this layer. That's what was doing that. So if this layer wasn't so small, I made it too narrow, you'd have a more successful one. But basically, one mask. I got the masks by going Layer, Auto Trace, and then I put both masks in one layer and use the Reshape. Set your source and destination. Use your correspondence points by alt-clicking to set a new one, like here. And then where you see that 0 circle up here, that's when you know you're moving the correspondence point. Don't change your mask points. And add as many correspondence points as you need. And that would do it. This would look a lot better if I didn't be so stingy with my side to side. So that's basically your morph. So you could test that out, and if you have any trouble, I have a whole tutorial on it. That's just a quick refresher on it if you didn't watch that lecture. But you can see right there my bounding box. That's what's tripping me up. I should have made my Photoshop layer much wider. You can see how the shape changed. Now we're going to take a look at ellipses, but great use of rule of thirds and keeping the eye where you want it to be. Yeah, no problem at all. Reshaping vectors, it depends if they're walking, but say they are walking, you could do, a split layer, like get to the end of the walk and then select your layer, go edit split layer, or hold down Command Shift D to split duplicate. So you get some motion, and then you could use that as export that frame if you need to make it like a JPEG or Photoshop layers, and then you can auto trace the alpha like I showed you. So hopefully that should work out pretty nicely for you. We'll test it out. This is what you talk about going from one scene to the next, I imagine. Lots of nice subtle particles. Love how you're keeping things within that, like the flickering. Love that. Yep, I see you understood what I meant by positive and negative space. Yeah, and then you could be at the next scene from there. So, if this becomes the bars that you're talking about, you're going to have your positive and your negative space. And you're probably going to need to split that into two separate ones where you've got the wallpaper, and then at some point, it's just the positive space for the fly-through so that you see the next animation. Alright, so I'll set up a new one here just to remind you about the fly-through. There's a couple ways of doing it. Here's the first way. I'm going to center this. And okay, so I'm actually going to import your work into here. There we go. Okay, so here's your precomp scene. Now remember, an alpha mat would be the shape of this star. You'll see something inside that shape. Alpha invert, I'm in my modes. Here's your switches. There's your modes. You click switches and modes to get there. So, alpha invert is the layer on top is cookie cutter knocking through the layer in the middle to reveal the layer below that. It's like a sandwich. That's an alpha invert. So if I scale up the star, I can fly into the scene below that. Layer on top punches through the layer in the middle to reveal the layer below that. That's an alpha invert fly-through map, okay? Now, yeah, I'm getting into that in a second with your scene transitions. We're flying in here, so we want it to look like we're flying in. And a good way to do that, I'm going to have my scale here at 100. This is where we're going to be in. And check this out. I can scale this down a bunch because we're not going to notice it until about here. So right about, so that was a touch too much. So now you got that subtle little bit of scaling up as you're flying through. If this star wasn't so pointy, I could do an even bigger scale in as we're flying, but since it's such a tall thing to fly through. So for your prison bars, you could use an alpha matte, I suppose. So I've got one shape layer, and I'm going to add a repeater to it. And I'm going to use my transform repeater to move them further apart from each other. Like such. So now they're evenly spaced out. There's the bars, much like the wallpaper you've got. Alright, so here's our positive space. And there's your scene. We'll pretend these are all perfectly the same size. And I'm creating a new scene to jump into. We'll pretend these touch. And we won't even need that actually at the point we're going to. So if we've got our camera, and you've got just the positive space, like where the texture on the bars is, and we animate the zoom, you can fly past those bars, depending upon where they are in Z space. Into the next shot. That's another way of doing it. Does that answer your question, Alexis? I think possibly it might be faster and easier to use an alpha invert matte, going from one scene to the next with your bars. Let's get rid of this shape and grab the bars. They're still set to alpha invert. Oh, but I've got to scale them up now. just gotta watch where you're flying through. See? Should work if we've got one in the center of the screen. It's because I moved it, but you get the idea. I think the fly through, I could, yeah. I think this will work the best if you've got it lined up properly and you don't go moving around after I set the keyframes like I did. That's the #1 rule. Don't move things after you keyframe it, but I did. But now you see it working. Alpha invert matte. Layer on top knocks through the layer in the middle to reveal the layer below that. It's a sandwich stack. You know, top punches through the middle to show the bottom layer. Oh, so I did edit this slightly. I'm going to get rid of the movie trailer thing. I think that's going to be a little too much work, whereas the title or the credit sequence is much more doable. So if anyone has anything they want me to look at or any questions, let me know. Again, that's just an example of turning a normal square, that's a shape layer. I used roughen edges, then I put a fractal behind it, that's grayscale, and put a displacement map on the shape layer and displaced that. And then I threw a glow on it and a turbulent displace. And I put an adjustment layer above that and I blurred it all a little bit. Just showing you how shapes can be more than just shapes in After Effects and motion design with a little bit of experimentation. And just look at the difference using the displacement map, the grayscale, for CC glass on the adjustment layer above it. Almost looks like the moon in rippling water now. And all I did was use that same grayscale image with a different effect on an adjustment layer. You can always play around and push your ideas. Just 30 seconds more of experimentation gave me a completely different look. And this has far more lighting and depth and fall off of light than what I'd had before. It's almost a painterly look about it. It's almost done rendering and then I'll see what it looks like. It's funny how before it had more of an energy feel and then just this glass gives it more of a paint look. And to push this paint look a little bit more, putting Posterize Time on there will make it look more abrupt and stop motion like. just to tie in from earlier. The main thing is time management. One of the things I excel at is turning around commercial work at a very short amount of time. And, just breaking things down will help you with that, because, like I said before, if it's going to take you too long to do something, you're not going to find work in the field. It's about coming up with solutions quickly that can catch someone's eye. And I'm just showing you a bunch of techniques and methods to just change things quickly. Because like I said, this started off as just a simple square shape layer. You could probably use this effect with text and get something really interesting to it. I really like this color palette, and I just fell across it by accident. Also, don't forget blending modes. That helped me achieve this as well. See what I mean? That extra little bit gave it more of a painterly stop motion type of feel about it. Even pushing this texture a little bit more will make it look more paint-like. I do like the look of this. It's pretty interesting. I would love to try this again with some text. Like I said, you could be doing this, like I've been using After Effects for well over a decade, and I'm constantly playing around and trying new things and just having a theory and testing it. That's one of the things I love about After Effects and motion design, is it never gets old. You could always try something new. Like I said before, I had something interesting with that energy type thing, but then using the grayscale displacement map on the bottom and throwing glass on top of it just gave it a more unique look about it. And plus, the glass effect gives light and shadow plus height to it, so that's another thing that helps push this and make it more interesting. It gives it more depth with that shading and lighting along with the displacement. Like, this would be pretty cool if I did this with an actual done animation rather than this test. I could get something pretty beautiful out of that. Now let me try something here. Just the adjustment layer does that to the text below. And I've got a completely different animation because of the text below instead of the shape. That's pretty interesting, putting it below and getting that. I'm just showing you that experimentation and playfulness, and then applying that to type. It gives you that custom look, and I want this type of attention and detail with your titles and credit sequences, this type of playfulness. Push it as far as you can, and I'm here to help along each step of the way. And obviously you could tone down this effect for something more subtle. I just wanted to push it a bit, but this has a nice horror vibe to it, and I'm getting some interesting distressing and decaying, plus I got that light fall off and the shading and the displacement from my glass effect. And while we're on the subject, choose your color wisely, because things like blue hold their true color throughout, adding white and black to it. But when you do things like red, once you start adding some light to it, then it starts shifting towards pink and mauve and things like that. So just be aware of that the blending modes and colors you use will greatly impact the colors in your palette. And then if I really wanted to drive this home, I could dial in each effect to get the look I want, but I'm just interested to see what this is going to look like as a 4-second animation with what I had before for the square. It's a funny turn of events going from the square to this, but I'm basically using all the same principles behind this animation as I did for the square. It's just the text adds that extra level of complexity to it. That's why I had to pay attention to not only my effect stack, but my layer stack as well, to have this amount of legibility to the text while still having all the distress and motion around it. Displacement is a great way of getting some interesting motion fast. Just remember, grayscale usually works with most of the maps in After Effects, and then just choose your layer and put a displacement map effect on that layer and use the grayscale pre-comp, because I had to pre-compose my fractal noise. You could use fractal noise, you could use turbulent noise, you could use whatever you want. You could even use video if you make it grayscale. Pre-compose that and set that as your displacement map in the displacement map effect of the layer that you want it to apply to. See, I think another thing that really helps make this interesting, like I said, is Posterize Time. That's pretty interesting, and I love the painterly feel of it. So it doesn't always have to be smooth to be interesting or eye-catching motion. I bet I could even play around more, and if I tamped down or removed the glow, I could have less of that and focus on, finding a way to isolate just the text and this interesting stuff happening, but it's all a juggling act. Again, don't forget to clear out your disk cache. I had 30 gigs of stuff just from tonight's lab time. I can show you doing eyes and eyebrows. I showed 3 ways of blinking last week, but I'm going to show you blinking with Duik. You make the eye whatever shape you want. And then you've got your pupil. Alright, next I'm going to do an upper lid and a lower lid. And don't forget, if you hold down Alt or Option, once you start dragging, you can adjust one part of the lid, the Bezier curve handle. And we'll pretend this is the skin color for the character. And let's say we'll call this fill. And I'm going to draw a stroke on here that's going to follow the eye shape. Actually, no, let's do a stroke with a trim path. Yeah, we'll do that. And just to keep my background black, I'm going to just make it a darker tone of that. Then I'll do my trim path next. Because I don't want too much eyelid stroke around it. For the top one, you definitely want the line here, but you do not want it up here at the top. That'll look weird. Remember round caps, round joins. Help you with that nice cartoon look. And again, most importantly, I'm going to parent my stroke to the path right here. So for my path for the stroke, I pick whip to the path to the fill. That way, when I animate the fill shape, the stroke will follow it perfectly. Okay, so that's our first eyelid. Now, when you're working with Duik, you want a workflow. I'm going to have the eyelid blink up and down. So, I go to my rigging, links and constraints, and I'm going to use a connector to animate this eyebrow. So I'm going to click the circle next to the connector. And remember, the gear, standard. You want to work in standard when you're in Duik, and if you're not in standard, change it to standard, hit apply changes, but I've already done that in the past. I'm going to do a joystick controller, so I click there to create it. This is the slider that will drive my motion, and this is the bounding box for that joystick controller. So I just hit P to position it and move it. Go move it out of the way. And I can hit S to scale down so it's not so big. I can even go into my effects for that. Nope, it's probably here. I can change the stroke color. I'll make it white just so we can see it. And there you have it. So here's my connector, the up and down. Okay, now we can see it. But I'm just going to put a solid in the background just to get off that checkered box for the alpha, because that drives me up a wall. Alright. So the up and down is going to change this eyelid. And I'm going to do a keyframe every 10 frames apart. 3. The up, resting, neutral in the middle, and then the down. Each keyframe is 10 frames apart. Again, that's up, resting, neutral, and then down. That's going to be my motion. And I animated the wrong stopwatch. There we go. The fill. Remember, we already pick whipped the path of the stroke to the fill. For the up, oh, the shapes were grouped. Go figure. But we troubleshot it. Oh, that was because that's what the grouping did. Okay, wait a second. So I'm just going to get rid of that. Alright, so the down will be across the eyelid, covering half of it. The middle position, normally that's your resting neutral when you're doing Duik, but my middle is going to be the halfway point of the eyelid closed, because I want that nice arc to it. I don't want a straight line blinking. So I've got a nice smooth eyelid blink. So I want to tie that to this connector. So I select that connector. I've already got my properties loaded. If they weren't, I would hit properties right here. And I'm going to tie this to the Y, up and down, of that joystick controller. So I select all my keyframes I want to tie to it, and I choose Connect Properties. I can hide that connector that just appeared. Now when I move my joystick up and down, the eyelid opens and closes. So I can do the same for a bottom eyelid. I'm just going to zero this out. Move it up. Now I just duplicated that to save myself some time. And when you're working in Duik, you want to break your expressions like I did there. And it's right there. That's how I broke it. And I'm going to Alt or Option click on that stopwatch to completely remove the Duik expression. Okay, so I wanted that we'll just have those join up about there. So what I did was I selected my path and I right clicked, I did mask path, free transform, and I rotated it 180 degrees. So now I can click there and do the same thing but backwards. So now my middle will be the halfway blink in this direction. And again, I want that nice curve to my eyelid. And then the first one will be all the way off of the eyeball. And remember, this would be the same color as the skin on the face, not this color you're seeing in the background. And since I had my top lid selected when I made my joystick, it named that joystick top lid. So I'm going to select my bottom lid. I'm going to make the next joystick. That one's going to be called bottom lid. So I'm just going to position and scale that a little bit like such. So I choose my keyframes for the bottom lid. There's my bottom lid. I'm going to want the y-axes. And if the properties weren't shown, I just click properties there. Again, I got here in rigging, connector, hitting the circle. All right, see, there's my properties. Y. I'm choosing the bottom lid. I selected them, and I just connect the properties. So now, the benefit to rigging this way, I can get as many different expressions as I want from this, and I don't have to draw any more, and I don't have to create any more keyframes. I just adjust these sliders and I've got an unlimited range of emotions and motions I can create from that. Okay, so that was the eyelids, the up and down. Now the pupil. Oh, and you know what? I'll show you one more thing while I'm here. These are guide layers, meaning they will not render. Okay, that's the way Duik is set up. So before I go too much deeper, I'm going to label these, and I'll teach you about making guide. I'd be remiss if I didn't. Okay, so here I've labeled this guide lid, and let me change the color of that font, sorry. Make it black, just so it's more legible. Sometimes when you're working in the field, you'll get things that have markups on guide layers. To create a guide layer, so that people know what controller this is, but it won't render out with the animation, I select that text layer, right click, and choose Guide Layer. I can duplicate that now, move it over, and name that bottom lid. And they're both still guide layers, so I know what controller is doing what. Next, I'll make the one for the pupil, and I'll use the shape of the eye as an alpha mat. So let's clear these up so we can see what we're doing. I'm going to duplicate this on top, label it matte so we know what it's doing. Now I select my pupil, and I went to my switches and modes, and I'm going to make this an alpha matte off the top shape of the eye. Okay, so the eye, we'll center it. I'm going to need 3 keyframes for the side to side, resting neutral, so it'll be looking left, resting neutral, looking right. Then another 3 keyframes, top, resting neutral, and bottom. And you'll see what that's going to do in a second. So here's my position, and I want to split this so I can have the 2 axes joystick connector do the work for me in Duik. So I right click on position, and I choose separate dimensions. 10 frames apart, and another 10 frames apart. Okay, so there's the resting neutral. Choose my left, and I'm going to move it as far to the left as I want. Let's say about there. Halfway off. Why not? There's my resting neutral. I'm just hitting go to next keyframe. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the right to have symmetrical motion. I'm going to have it go halfway off. Go back to my resting neutral. Now I'm going to work on my up and down. I'm going to have it so it's about half on, half off. Then do the same for the down. So with my pupil selected, I'm going to click the Create a Connector. Remember, we're in Rigging. I went to Links and Constraints, and then the circle next to the word Connector. If I click there, now it's named after the pupil, and I move the background bounding box off for the joystick, and I can scale it and position it where I want. So I select my joystick slider layer, and I've got my properties selected. X. Here's my X keyframes. There's X. I connect to properties. I'm going to change this to Y axes. Select my Y. Connect to properties. Now let's test it out. See, now I've got a circular motion because I split the X and the Y axes, and now the joystick controller is allowing me to move like that, and the eye, we duplicated the white of the eye to work as an alpha mat. So I duplicate my guide layer for text, eye rotation. Now I know what each controller is doing. And I can animate these as I see fit by choosing the slider and animating the position, the Y or the X and the Y. Like such. So that's a little bit extra in here for you, showing you how to use a little bit more of Duik. Now if I want to clean up my timeline a bit, I can choose the CBG layers for the slider controllers, and I can shy those. I can shy my text layers for my guides as well, and I can shy that connector that I created. And I can paste those, and I can ease these. Like such. Oh, hey, what you could try for the rig as a whole. That's a good question. Sorry I didn't see it. And I'm glad you jumped on. And I'm glad you had faith that I'd be here. And just so you know, Carrie, we're only doing one assignment for the final. Choose either the title sequence or the credit sequence, okay? About 15 seconds, do your best work, because you're not doing two, you're doing just one now. And I will answer your question as best I can. It's funny, I just decided, can I still do two for fun? If you want to try, yeah, but, you know, put your best foot forward with this. Oh, hey, look, we were just talking about eye blinks. And if you want, you could use this eye white shape to keep the dog inside if you need to. Okay, so here's your dog. All right, good. I'm just going to my character rigging workspace. This little button down here, the middle, that's what I was hitting to bring back up the number values. And you can see how that's influencing the rig of your character. Okay, so your art is parented to the structures and the bones. The bones and the structures are parented to the connectors. What I do when I'm learning new software is I make notes in Google Docs just so I can reference them at any time. It's a good habit to get into, and I always label my notes based upon the software. If it were going to jump, you might want a little bit of a crouch down for that anticipation, and watch out for that extra layer that we don't know where it is, but we'll, you know, it's here. You just gotta like unshy it, then click the eyeball for it. But there are cheats, like this comp one, right? And you've got your text in comp 1, which, you know, will hide that. So we're focusing on just the animal, okay? There's our ground. I'm moving your precomp. And then, working here as well. I'm just doing something extreme to show you. So I moved the rigging here and I'm moving the precomp there, but see how you're getting that little bit of flexibility here by splitting the timeline like I did. I just dragged it out of there, undocked it, and put it here so it's stacked. The rig, you can animate the position of that rig and then individually in here move your limbs around like such. Does that help you out a little bit? Like, that's the fastest workaround I can think, is using a stacked timeline with just the dog in its own precomp so you can move the position as well as the rotation. And let's have it angle down a little bit, and then we'll have it fall back down, and then you could do the impact here. And then I got to undo that rotation. See? This workflow might benefit you. You can position and rotate the entire rig here, and then up in here, focus on your individual limbs. Okay, cool. And remember, just to stack your timeline, you simply grab what you want to undock and move it down there to that panel I showed you. And just make sure you clearly name this, like, you know, dog rig. And then you could do your position and rotation here of the full rig, and then your fine movement up in here. Well, at least we found a little bit of a workaround for you, and I Hope that helps. And again, watch that extra little tail layer. That's one of your layers you need to turn the eyeball off of in your full body rig. But glad I was able to help you a little bit tonight with that. It's not the best solution, but at least we found a solution, and that's what it's all about, you know. Like I said before, we know the artwork is parented to the bones and the structure, and we know the structure is parented to the controllers and the connectors you've got. That's why my null wasn't working. But at least here, having a full pre-comp of just the body, you can work on the gross motion, the position and rotation, and then do your fine motion up in there. All right, well, I hope you have a great weekend. Thanks for sticking around for the rest of the lecture and, you know, even showing up, hoping we were all here. We missed you. And, you know, you were able to help push this lab time a little bit further by showing that troubleshooting aspect of motion design, which is so crucial. It's, you know, you just got to think it through. Like we said, we knew how this is rigged and the parenting order of it. So the best solution we could get was to have the pre-comp moving that and then doing the fine motion there with the stacked timeline. No problem at all, Carrie. It's what I'm here for. Hope you have a great night and a good weekend, and I look forward to seeing some more of your motion here. Do you need this as a reference, or you're just going to be good with the recording of this? Okay, you're good? All right, excellent. Well, have a great weekend. All right, and everyone else out there, stay safe, have a good weekend, and look forward to seeing some more of your animations.